Excellent. Hello, and welcome to the third and final day of the Onyx Path virtual gaming convention. My name is Rich Thomas. I am the founder and creative director of Onyx Path Publishing, and we are so thrilled that you folks are here. This panel is What's Up with the Onyx Path, part 2, and we will be talking about a whole bunch of our game lines, just generally, and we'll be answering questions from the chat. Please put your question in the chat. Preface it with question in all caps so that it's so we can find it, because the chat tends to blur past us as people are commenting. So just a little bit of a brief recap of who we are and why we're doing this whole thing. Onyx Path Publishing started in 2012, and we have been putting out tabletop RPG game books and electronic gaming tools since that time. We are operating with a license to create RPGs from the old White Wolf properties of Exalted, Chronicles of Darkness, and the World of Darkness. And during that time period, that license traveled from across the world, traveled from CCP, who merged with White Wolf years and years ago, to Paradox, and Paradox is the current people who own those properties, but we still create books with a license from those. But we also have our own games. We have Scion, Trinity, Continuum. They came from beneath, or they came from ... which right now is they came from beneath the sea, but we're going to be doing they came from beyond the grave later on today at 4 o'clock. And we have Scarlands, which is a 5th edition fantasy genre game that has a long pedigree and is quite fun. And we have some additional games that we have either licensed or we're working with the creators in kind of a more creator-owned situation. And those include the Realms of Pugmire and Cavaliers of Mars, and we have a license for Dystopia Rising Evolution, which is just coming out, and for Legendlore, which is a fantastic fantasy game. And we actually have the developer for that here on this panel, Steffie de Vaan. So that's kind of what how we started, in the kind of games lines that we've been working on. We have a lot of projects that we're working on. Many of them haven't been announced yet, and this is your opportunity to talk to us and ask us questions about all that stuff. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. We have Eddy Webb, who
Hello.
knows many things about all of the projects that we work on, since Eddy and I have been working together all the way back to when we worked together at White Wolf.
Yep.
He is also the creator of Pugmire, and as you can tell from his picture behind him, he likes to sit in taverns in Pugmire and listen to all the dogs bark at each other.
It's true.
Yep. There's also Neall Raemonn Price, who is the lead for our Scion line and development, as well as a very experienced writer and developer for Exalted, and so he'll be answering questions about both game lines. And then Steffie de Vaan, who, as I just mentioned, recently has helmed the Legendlore game line, as well as doing tons of fantastic writing for us. And the Legendlore is actually on Kickstarter right now. We funded just as the convention started, which was fantastic news we could share, and it's now running towards stretch goals, which we think are going to be fantastic to really expand what the game is all about. So with that, I'm going to pass the talk baton over to Eddy, and I'm going to sit back and bits mostly. It'd just be kind of a pain in the butt for the panelists.
That is basically Rich's role, is to pay us and to be a pain in our butts.
There you go.
So as Rich mentioned, my kind of role with an Onyx Path primarily is, generally speaking, is anything that's not a White Wolf licensed property, and also Scarlet Mist and Legendlore, which have transitioned over to Matthew Dawkins. So I'm also no longer handling the directly 5th edition stuff. But I do have a lot of other things to talk about. One of those is Scion, but I will go ahead and leave that for Neall to pontificate on. But one of the ones that Rich mentioned earlier was Dystopia Rising Evolution, and that has just kind of gone out a couple of months ago, I want to say, something about that. And we're excited about it. It was one of our first non-White Wolf licenses we got a chance to work with, and it was honestly a great chance to do something that's kind of in our wheelhouse. It's a post-apocalyptic game, so there's some horror elements in there, but also something that we hadn't really done before. So there's a nice kind of balance of novelty and familiarity from our design perspective. And we're getting some pretty good feedback so far. Some people have posted some extremely positive reviews of it online. I'm pleased with how it's being received, and I'm happy with how it turned out as a developer. We have 2 other books that came out with that. We have a Jumpstart, which actually came out before the rule book. So if you want to get a sense of what Dystopia Rising is like, that's definitely a good place to check out. We also have our Wasteland Beasties, Hell Now's Guide to Wasteland Beasties, which is not only some more giant monsters or irradiated monsters, I should say, for Dystopia Rising, but also some fiction to go with it. We do have on the horizon, we have an anthology, which is the last of our kind of stretch goals for Dystopia Rising. So Matt McElroy is working with his team on the fiction side to pull together some really fantastic authors. I think they've actually already started writing on that. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how that turns out. And then beyond that, we don't have a ton more coming up right now for Dystopia Rising. We kind of just want to, we have a screen, a couple of things. We have the community content program we're rolling out. So that's taking up a lot of our current kind of space for.
Yeah, community content is a big thing for us with that. So.
Right. In particular, one of the things that we're trying to coordinate with some of the folks who run the live action side of Dystopia Rising, so that way the live action crews can start to take their chronicles and characters and put them up as resources for the tabletop game. So that's something else that could be very fun and exciting. So moving on from that, Ian talked yesterday a lot about the Trinity Continuum, so I won't go too much into that. The main things I kind of want to reiterate is we are working on Aberrants still. The Kickstarter was really, really great. We had a great time with that and did really, really well. We got a lot of great feedback from our community on the Aberrant Kickstarter, which we were able to incorporate into the text before it went to layout. Some people have expressed concerns that the entire manuscript has changed and everything's different now, and that's not what happens. A lot of it was mostly some people were unclear on a lot of points in the mechanics, so we were able to kind of clarify those and make sure that what we were trying to say was getting across better. We did simplify a couple of systems. We did tweak a couple of them based on playtest data, which for a game that's ultimately a superhero game with lots of different kinds of abilities, that's a natural thing to do at that stage. But I mean, if you really loved what you saw in the original Kickstarter, you're going to see very similar to that in the final book. So no worries in that front. We spent a lot of time making that manuscript the way it was before it went to Kickstarter. We don't want to just throw it all out. So we're definitely happy about that. Also, Adventure is in progress. As Ian kind of teased yesterday, we are working on something interesting to promote it. With the Aberrant Kickstarter, we were able to get a comic book together written by the fantastic comic book writing legend Paul Jenkins. So we're doing something in a similar vein, but different for Adventure, and I'll kind of leave it there for now.
Genre and time period appropriate.
Yeah, it's going to be very appropriate for the 1930s era that we're shooting for Adventure. And then we also have Trinity Assassins, which was pitched by the very same Neall Raemonn Price.
That guy.
After he binged a whole lot of John Wick and Hitman games.
It's true. I did do that thing.
But it's not being developed by the comparable Monica Specca. And I did get a chance to look at an early draft of it in prep for some discussion on the Pathcast, and it's already looking really, really good. So I think we're really happy about that. And then, of course, TC Anima, which is our brand new, never before done aspect of the Trinity Continuum, which is our cyberpunk kind of slice. It's going to be set kind of between Aberrant and Aeon in terms of timeline perspective. And also incorporates a large virtual worlds MMO that a lot of people are involved with and engaged on, and then something strange happens. Either two top streamers, two top players, and so the player characters are kind of incentivized to find out what's going on in this era where a brand new city is being rebuilt in the ashes of the Aberrant War. And in fact, everybody else in the panel is writing with me on that book too. So I'm really excited for what that's going to be. So that's all the Trinity stuff. Is there another game I'm responsible for that I should be talking about? What is it?
Turn around, look at your thing behind you.
Oh, right. Pugmire. Yes, that's it. That's the one. Yes, Pugmire. We have been getting some stuff wrapped up for Pirates of Pugmire. The beta
including
PDF
going to press.
Yeah, it's getting that to press. The beta PDF's been out to backers and have been hearing, again, good things. People are having fun with it. Also, kind of snuck up on the schedule. I kept it quiet for a while, but I did a small book called Buried Bones, which is creating in the realms of Pugmire. It was I had a lot of people talking about kind of what it was like to make community content for Pugmire or running games, and they were asking me questions about how to make it authentic, quote unquote. And I realized I had written a lot about that topic, but in a wide variety of places. So I kind of consolidated all together, along with Travis Legg had written some really great rules on how to convert 5e material to Pugmire. And I had gotten a lot of great questions and clarifications during the Japanese translation process of Pugmire. So I put it all together in a nice small book for people to kind of pick up and give them some tips, some errata, some guidelines, and just generally kind of get a sense of what I feel like Pugmire works best as, if people are interested in that material.
I just want to touch on that a little bit, just the idea that at all phases of whatever we do with a game line, we're always looking for ways to improve it. And in this particular case, the rigors of translating the English language version of Pugmire to a Japanese language version of Pugmire was absolutely fascinating. Just how they needed to clarify some things that we thought were very, very clear, because translating it into their language was not gonna. It made it unclear. So it was how do we say this best? And then we went, did we say that right to begin with? Did we work off of too many assumptions that people could understand this? And so it was really, really helpful, as well as a lot of fun. And it's going to be just a gorgeous little books.
Yeah, and it was an interesting process too, because it because of the way Japanese language works, I've discovered there were things like I need to find out all the characters' relative ages to each other, because of the way they refer to each other, and their relative heights to each other. And some of the material we had established, actually, Rich had created a height guide for the characters early on that we only share with artists, and so I was able to kind of share that with the translators to give them some context. But yes, for those who didn't know, our friends at Group SNE is a Japanese company that's been around since 1986, actually. And they did a lot of stuff for things like Tunnels and Trolls in particular. And they had been chatting with us pretty much since the Kickstarter about possibly doing a Japanese translation. So we chatted with them, we met at a couple Gen Cons to kind of nail down some information. And they released their translation late last year, mid last year, around there. It's been a bit. So, and they're also doing a translation of Fetch Quest as well. Yep. So, and I believe Pan's Guide. So yeah, there's going to be a fair number of Japanese translations for that coming down the pipe. And one of the questions in the chat is also how many games or languages our games been translated into. We generally don't talk about our translations until they get finished. because we found in the past sometimes people have good intentions to try to translate a game and it just doesn't work out for some reason. They run into some difficulties or it's not a good fit or whatever. So at least I don't want to be able to say, hey, this game's coming out in this, Pugmire's coming out in this language, and then something happened where the company can't make it work somehow. So I'd rather wait until it's like, no, it's out there in the world. Now we have a new translation. But I will say that we have had other people approach us about translating Pugmire specifically. So at least some of those are coming out. But that was not the big exciting announcement I wanted to make, although it is an exciting announcement. I'm really excited to see it coming out in other languages. That just definitely makes me giddy.
It's a real kick.
It is. But the big one is that we are working on a new Pugmire supplement. We just started the process on that about a few weeks ago. It is called Squeaks in the Deep. And it is our rats and mouse supplements for both Pugmire and Monarchies of Mao. It is set predominantly in what is called the Underneath, which is kind of our underworld area for stretches between both Pugmire and Monarchies of Mao. And it's also going to spend a lot of time exploring what it's like to live inside of the societies of Pugmire, inside the societies of the monarchies. Because rats and mice have their own culture, but it is kind of in the context of those two major areas, as opposed to Pirates of Pugmire, where it's a very cosmopolitan area, but it's away from those two. This is kind of inside those areas a bit more, and then literally digging underneath the cultural elements of those two main areas. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cult of Laborator there as well. And unlike cats and dogs and lizards and birds who have magical spells, mice and rats have psionics. So we're coming up with a new kind of approach to psionics for Pugmire and for, to a certain degree, HAL 5th edition, because 5th edition doesn't have an official psionics kind of write-up yet. So we are definitely going to have a lot of fun with this kind of next big step in making playable characters for people and digging into a new chunk of the realms of Pugmires. So I'm excited about that. I can't wait to see what the writers come up with. But that is it for me. How about go to Neall? Talk about Scion stuff.
Okay. So Scion 2nd edition came out last year fully, with the PDF coming out just the year before. It's definitely been cooking along, and rather than developing each of the books myself,
because you have a life.
Yeah, because I have a life. I've consulted with a lot of other developers, and Onyx Path has hired a lot of other developers to sort of do it, and I sort of sit over them as lead developer, which I like to say is kind of a first among equals position. But it means I am involved.
Like Augustus.
Yeah, little. Yeah, I wasn't gonna put it that way.
I did.
Yeah, everyone's been doing a fantastic job. One of the big books that's upcoming very soon, I think, that I'm extremely excited for is Titanomachy, which was developed by Monica Specca, who's a good friend of mine and a fellow co-developer you may have seen in the Exalted game the other night. Titanomachy deals with the big war against the gods that's coming up, the release of the Titans. One of the things we did for 2nd edition was that we really took a big step back to look at divine politics as a whole. And I thought that there was a lot more pathos in, gods having rivalries against one another inside the pantheons and out. And I put all that in Scion 2nd edition. And then Danielle Lazan, who's another good friend of mine, and an amazing designer, came up to me and was like, you kind of removed the big impetus and the big driving force of Scion 1st edition. And I was like, oh crap. So Titanomachy is meant to fully address that and to give a lot of antagonists for your Scions to battle against in a mythic manner. Just released, and I think is about to be released to the public soon. It just went out to backers. Is the Scion Hero Companion, Mysteries of the World. I'll get to that question in just one second. Mysteries of the World deals with all of the Kickstarter fulfillment stuff, but there's some really cool stuff in there about how to bend the genre of Scion to fit what you want. And we have a lot of very cool pantheons. We have the expansion for the Loa. We have the Nematondivos, which are the gods of Gaul. And I'm missing a third one. What am I missing? I don't remember. Not important.
Atlantis?
Well, Atlantis is one, but I'm missing a third one. All of our listeners can.
Loa.
There are a lot of books, Scion books happening right now.
Yeah, that's the thing is that
with a lot of pantheons being worked on.
People will always ask me what are the 10 pantheons in the core, and I'm like, I can get like 7 out of 10 of them.
Yazada?
Yes, the Yazada. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan, Story Told Chaz.
How could I forget? Pablo, one of our writers, is going to be very mad at me. But yeah, I do. Upcoming books we have for Scion. I'm very excited about Mass of the Mythos, which is being developed by another good friend of mine, Chris Spivey. It deals with bringing the deities and sort of the old ones concepts that were espoused by H.P. Lovecraft and how to bring them into Scion. And it's not canonical, like it's not. We're not going to make further Scion books assuming that the old ones are out there. This is if you want to include a sort of different alien cosmology and you want to inject much more horror and investigation into your Scion game. That's what that supplement is fundamentally about. Mm-hmm. And in a similar vein, we have Scion Dragon coming up. Most dragons are sort of individual members of their cosmology, but Scion Dragon takes a slightly alternate spin on it as a full core book to say, what if all these dragons had a shared lineage and a shared, a shared grouping amongst themselves? And Scion Dragon posits dragons as the biggest, baddest legendary creatures out there to be a sort of third group between the gods and the titans. They're in the middle there, and they're kind of playing both sides. So what other books do we have going on with Scion, Rich?
Well, you touched on Assassin. No, wait, that's Trinity. I saw your face. I saw your face, and I said Assassin.
There's Wild Hunt.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, please tell people about Wild Hunt, because we really haven't said much about that.
Yeah, we have not said much about that. So the Wild Hunt, so one of the other things that someone came up to me after Scion 2nd edition was published and was like, I really don't understand why there's a lot of reasons for Scions of different pantheons, the children of the gods, to be venturing around with one another. And I was like, well, the big primary reason we give in the books, and this is touched on a lot in Demigod, is that Scions of different gods are able to sort of break the cosmology of other pantheons in highly specific ways. Well, what do you mean, Neil? Well, for example, in the Norse underworld, in Hell, no flames can really exist. It's a cold, dreary realm, right? So if you're Norse or you're mortal, you can't bring a flame down into Hell. But if you are, a Scion of Agni, the Hindu god of fire, you are fire. So you can just be this big glowing pyre beacon in the Norse Hell. And the Norse are like, what is this? I've never seen this. So in that way, you can sort of hijack the mythic narratives of other pantheons to kind of further your goals. So that's a big reason why you want to venture with other pantheons and other Scions, because that really helps you to deal with your own mythic narratives in a outside context way. But that wasn't enough for me, because I couldn't quite get that criticism out of my mind. It stuck in me. So Wild Hunt is about organizations that exist regardless of pantheon, that exist across all the pantheons. The titular Wild Hunt is the big one. The Wild Hunt is a huge part of European and Central and Eastern European mythology. And it's led by various supernatural beings, and you can join with the hunt to hunt someone, or you can be hunted by the wild hunt if you want. And it's not a permanent thing. You can join up and then drop out if you want. But we cover a lot of other groups as well. Like there is a group that's led by the god Anansi that is dedicated to social justice across the world and liberation. There is the group I'm really fond of is called the King's Guard. There's a lot of sleeping king myths across the entire world. Like there's the myth of the king under the mountain, or the king who will return when the nation really needs them. And that's a weird commonality across a lot of different myths. So I thought, what if there was a single group that was sort of dedicated to either keeping certain kings asleep or trying to wake certain kings up? Because it's either a very good thing or a very bad thing for the nation in question that those kings wake up. So that's Wild Hunt.
And the last one I could think of is the LARP, which maybe I could probably address better.
How deeply did you go into Demigod?
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. Okay.
You know, like how we haven't really said that much about it. I mean,
sure.
Okay.
We did do a play test yesterday. A stealth play test.
So Demigod is kind of interesting. I really wanted to. I have this idea that I have this idea that every edition of a game is a sort of reaction to the previous edition of the game, and you see this in a lot of different games where the edition will try to sort of address the biggest criticisms of the previous edition. And you know, I'm not slagging on the people who wrote Scion First Edition, but I did, when I was playing it, I did feel that Demigod was just sort of like Hero Plus. It didn't feel like a different game fundamentally. So what I wanted to do with Demigod is create a different atmosphere and create a slightly different play experience that was similar to Hero, but felt different and felt like you were really making the myths that made you you. So Demigod is almost a limited series concept. You're asked to plot out the milestones of your character's development to becoming a god, starting with saying and declaring, I'm going to become a god. And once you do that, the clock starts ticking a little bit, and you have declared to fate that you will shed your mortality, and you're going to shed your mortality one way or another. So we have you plotting out a number of milestones. We have you going through them in a sort of tightly plotted arc and bouncing from character to character in order to fulfill that. And like I said, that's another reason for characters to venture around together. They can help each other with their apotheosis journeys. And at the very end, you can keep playing Demigod as long as you want. I want to stress that. But in game, there is an ending, and there's an ending coming for you. And so when you pursue that, at the very end, you shed your mortality, and you could actually physically die. And if you have failed enough of those milestones along the way, you don't become a god. You die as a mortal. But if you succeeded and you have persevered, then when you shed your mortality, your immortal self awakens essentially as a god. And we're going to cover what that is in Scion God.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I see two questions here in the chat. What's the view of Titans and Titanomachy? Do they view themselves as the good guys? For the most part, there's a lot of Titans who have, there's a specific Titan archetype called an adversary. And adversaries typically see themselves as the bad guys because that's how they define themselves, in opposition to someone else. But fundamentally, most Titans are either they're generally misunderstood, or they don't understand why people want to lock them away, which can make them very sympathetic. The example I like to go to is Helios. Helios is a Titan. He's a Titan of the sun. And Helios is perfectly friendly. He's very nice. He's very proud, but other than that, he's hospitable. But if you went to greet him, he would give you cancer and blast the skin off your bones, and cook you like a sausage because he's the sun, and he just can't turn that off. And they don't want him. The Greek gods don't want him wandering around, basically cooking everyone, right? So they stick him on a mountain, and he stays there because he doesn't understand why they want him to stay there, but he knows that they do, so he stays there. But a lot of other Titans aren't so understanding. They want to wreak havoc. They want to be themselves. They want to do this or that, and so they can't really be allowed to roam free. They're giant monsters, so they need to be locked away. And we do deal a little bit with the moral quandary of that, of well, what gives the gods the right to imprison these beings? By what right do you lock them away? And we have an entire pantheon called, the Orisha, who sort of object to this entire treatment of Titans and don't really acknowledge Titans as fundamentally different from the world. And we even have the Shen, the celestial bureaucracy, the Chinese pantheon, who employs a lot of Titans sometimes. They're like, well, sometimes you need a giant monster, so let me give you a job. So some of them view themselves as the good guys, but for the most part, they just want to be themselves. And it just so happens that being themselves is a Godzilla-sized flaming monster.
Like you do.
Yeah.
There's also a question about Fae.
Yes. You said in a previous interview you had big plans for the Fae and Scion you weren't ready to share at this time. Can you reveal more now? No.
Nah.
So one of the, like I said, when we were first talking about Scion second edition with Rich is like, I really want the world of Scion to be a lot bigger than it was in first edition. And so a lot of what we laid down in the groundwork of Origins and Hero was, the focus is still on the gods and on divinity, but it's a very big world out there. And Dragon is just sort of the first step in there. If you wanted to broaden the lens away from the gods and away from the relationship of humanity to divinity and have giant monsters, you pick up Dragon. And we wanted to deal with the idea of mortal interaction with supernatural trickster beings that isn't a trickster deity, that isn't a god precisely. And what would their society look like? What would those interactions look like? So that's sort of the thing we're looking at for Fae. And I can say that when we would do the book, they would be a fourth faction alongside dragons or so. But we wouldn't assume that the Dragon book is necessarily something you want in your game. You could use Dragon, you could use Fae, you could use both or neither if you wanted to in your Scion game.
Neal, just one more thing. What about Saints and Monsters?
Oh, Saints and Monsters. Glad you asked. I like player's guides. I've always liked player's guides. They are full of fiddly little mechanical options that can really broaden out your character a lot. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to provide a lot of the options that people had expressed interest in and provide different characters that could adventure alongside your Scions in the game. And I wanted to specifically address each level of play, the Origins, Hero, Demigod that were sort of in development at the time. So Saints and Monsters is going to allow you to play a lot more legendary creatures. There's going to be a lot more, if you want to be descended from a satyr, you want to be descended from a centaur, there's going to be a lot of different options for your characters available there. And you can still be a Scion, you just have a weirder ancestry than most. You can play a sorcerer if you want. They are generally mortals who have stolen the power of the gods through arcane rituals and, are usually more knowledgeable sometimes than the gods themselves about the way magic works. You can be a Scion of a Titan. Some Titans take human form, and sometimes they get busy, and that's how you get a Scion. But what does it mean to be a Scion of a Titan? What does that actually result in you being? So we cover a little bit of that in Titanomachy, the more social side of it, but we cover the mechanical side of it in Saints and Monsters.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, and there's one last little thing in there. One of the things people were saying is, well, there's a lot more fiddly options in the Trinity Continuum than there is in Scion's version of Story Path. That was deliberate. We kind of split off in the terms of development and how we were going to do things. But we decided or rather I decided that there were a lot of really great ideas and a lot of really amazing design going on in Trinity that I still wanted to steal for Scion, but it was a little too late to put in the core book. So there's going to be a section in Saints and Monsters about how to incorporate some of the more granular path mechanics and edges into Scion itself if you wanted to bring over some stuff from your Trinity game.
All right. So, Steffi.
Yeah, so Legendlore.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, so Legendlore is a 5th edition game based on the 80s Legendlore comics. It's currently on Kickstarter. We've just funded and we're going for stretch goals. So the idea is that you find a crossing, like a chest or a box or whatever, and you teleport yourself into the realm where you play you, but with a fantasy class and a fantasy template. So I might be Steffie the Pixie Bard, but I still have all of my memories and my experiences, and I would basically be me, but very small with rings and spells. And I think that's very exciting. We've had a lot of good feedback from everyone who's read it and played it. And we're currently in stretch goals. We're gonna expand on the legends. So when you cross, you also get an epic destiny for yourself, like the Mistress of Dragons, or the Slayer of Demons, or the Liberator of Dwarves, or whatever you want to be. And those are custom tailored to each specific character. So you write your own, basically. Well, we have 6 examples in the book. You could pick one of those if it matches you perfectly, but the idea is that you can write your own. But for one of the stretch goals, we're going to open a backer option where you can pledge, and then one of the writers is going to work with you to bring your legend to the book. So that would be official.
As an example legend.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So you'd be in the book, and we would save you the trouble of having to write it yourself. But they're not very complicated to write. But I think that's exciting. Matt McElroy wants to see if we can open it up to community content, which I also really want to do, because I've just ventured onto the DM's Guild. If anyone's playing Theros, we released Masks of Theros a week or so ago. It's level 1 to 11 adventures, so if you're interested in Theros, go pick that up. But I know that people have some quandaries about using the DM's Guild, and Legendlore would be a great alternative to that, because it's a great little world with still lots of places unexplored. And there are all these nations that are playing off each other and working together or not working together. But I think it would be great to open that to community content and just let people write their own stuff and their own classes and their own people. So I would really, really love for that to happen. That was Matt McElroy's idea, but I'm all for it if we can get to those stretch goals too. So I would encourage people to go back it. Let's see what else. So it's based on the comics, and the comics are they had like 40 issues and crossovers.
Yeah, for decades.
I know there's a lot going on with the comics.
You had to do a lot of research.
I had to read all of them back to back. So we did decide that we were going to focus on the first 20 of the comics, because after that, somebody opens a box and there's a demon storm and everything changes, and it's basically a whole reset. It would have been a completely different game. So we focused on the first 20. But what happened is there used to be a war between various nations and various people, and then there was a plague demon who started resurrecting the dead, and it was so bad that everybody else was just like, yeah, forget about the war. We've got the undead walking the land, and we should probably focus on that. And they kicked him back to an island where he now sits in what is basically the Notre Dame Cathedral. But that led to this weird standoff that the aggressor in the war, which is the nation of Drome, and the largest, most powerful nation on the good side, to call it that, basically came to an agreement where the good nation said, we're just going to build a wall around ourselves. You're going to leave us alone. We're going to stay inside our wall. You're going to stay outside the wall. It'll be fine. You do whatever you want. And now the aggressor nation, predictably, is attacking other people again.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, weird, huh? And what should be the good nation is going to go, yeah, but we have an agreement. We have a truce. We have a war, and it'll be fine. And he's just going to conquer the rest of the world, and then he's going to leave us be, like, because that was the deal. So, so I think that makes for an interesting situation. There's a lot of social hooks that people could explore if they're interested in that. But there's also a lot of straight up adventure locations that we did specifically. There's a Skyland where Emilia Earhart ended up after she got lost from Earth. Her descendants are now running like this nation with airplanes. We have an adventure location where the Alexandrian Library ended up in the realm. We have an adventure nation where a full expedition ended up. But we decided, because one thing, I didn't want people to explore the realm and then accidentally run into Nazis. You don't want to do that. So we put them on the other side of the undead. So the undead are very politely keeping all the Nazis away from the civilized people. But if you did want to go somewhere and just fireball people in the face, we got you covered. You can just go there and do that. So we've got adventure locations to just do quick games, and we've got a lot of big nations if you wanted to do like a political game and delve into why is war bad. So you can do both. And what Corinne is actually doing with her Legendlore game is she is using it as a crossover for other 5th edition games. So you could absolutely take somebody from Scartlands and somebody from Pugmire and somebody from Theros and somebody from the Forgotten Realms, and they could all end up in the realm and just have adventures there. And I think Corinne said that the Pugmire dogs are really freaked out because they think they died because there are people here. Humans.
Oh, they went to heaven.
No, they think they went to purgatory.
These dogs have gotten pretty far into the dogma.
Yes. So, but yeah, it works really great as a little crossover setting too. So that's exciting. That is Legendlore in a nutshell.
Yeah, we don't actually know. I mean, the things that could come from Legendlore are real still to be determined by the Kickstarter. So there's additional things we could be doing.
Yeah. So the basics of it is it's an isekai game, a portal fantasy game. But you can actually use it for crossovers into different 5th edition. And I'm hoping we unlock a ton of stretch goals because we do have a lot of exciting stuff left. I do want to say for one stretch goal, I think might be the last one on the list. All of this takes place in East Azul. Azul is basically the continent that they have in the realm, and it's divided by a mountain range in the middle and an ocean in between, and the ocean has like boiling places and giant maelstroms and whirlpools, and so you can't just sail around the continent because your boat is going to be eaten by something, and you can't just go across the mountains. So there's very little interaction, and all we ever see in the comics and what we explored in the role-playing game book is in East Azul. Mm-hmm. We do get some people, like we know that there are centaurs and dragons in the west, who we see one in the comic or we hear about them. But so one of the things I would love to do in the stretch goal is to write more about West Azul and explore that more fully because there's a lot of unexplored land. So that's what we want to do with Legendlore.
Right, me too. Yeah. Okay. Well, folks, if you want to start answering some questions, Travis, you want to feed them to us or whatever.
So we've got a couple right now. I can see. The first is from Neall. And he wanted to mention isekai in relations to Legendlore.
And Steffi did. Something I think that I don't think a ton of the Onyx Path developers are super familiar with anime, just as a general thing. And isekai as a sort of anime genre is very recent, within the last like 15, 20 years or so. But for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a Japanese anime genre where a protagonist from the real world, like our world, gets transported to a fantasy land or reincarnated in a fantasy land. There's a lot of really kind of nuances to it that are ultimately meaningless to someone just sort of looking at it. A lot of people, when I've shown Legendlore to them kind of excitedly, they're like, oh, it's an isekai game. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And now I do. So if you're wondering how to explain it to your anime loving friends, just drop the word isekai in there and they'll get it.
And to your older friends, you can just introduce that. Remember the Dungeons and Dragons comics with the little creature who is literally called the Dungeon Master.
Oh yeah.
The cartoon is a great example.
The cartoon, that is exactly what it's like. No, that is exactly what it's like, except the fact that the Dungeon Master doesn't walk around physically, so you could absolutely just do that. We should make that a stretch goal. Like we will introduce the Dungeon Master. Races you can play as a Dungeon Master. Yeah.
He has every spell.
Little bald guys.
Yeah, you instantly become a level 20 epic character and level the dwarf. My bet is he's a dwarf. But yeah, that's basically it's like Narnia. It's very much like Narnia.
Yeah, that's true. Also, someone asked, do cats eat mice in Pugmire? And the answer is not really. Basically, there are unevolved as well as uplifted versions of animals in Pugmire. So there are canines as well as dogs, there are felines as well as cats, and there are rodents as well as mice and rats. So felines might eat rodents because they're not evolved. But generally speaking, if it talks, you don't eat it. That's going to have this default rule in Pugmire. And even evolved cats generally don't eat mice anymore. Many of them move to either a herbivore diet or a more omnivorous diet. So it doesn't happen in the same way. Another question is, does it look like we'll have more phone formatted books released?
That's really a Matt question, since he has the actual numbers on that.
Right.
We had taken a look right early when we first released it. It was okay, but those things really do require an enormous amount of work. We like to have more of them put out because we think it is a cool, handy concept. But we just have to figure out how to allocate that effort properly so that we're not putting an enormous amount of effort towards that when we have books that need to get out, close to on time.
Right.
Sort of.
The question, there are a lot of DR location books for the old edition. Any chance we'll get those books updated to the new edition, maybe a time forward? And the answer is, we'll see. So right now, the DR Evolution is in fact several years forward from the first edition. We don't specify how many years because I wanted people to come with a fresh start. But certainly some things have changed from first edition to the new edition, in not only the system, but also from a world perspective. And some of that was just because we all agreed that some of the stuff did not age well and wanted to get rid of some of the problematic concerns, as well as also just putting a fresh spin into things that just weren't landing correctly from the original edition. That said, a lot of the location books are also tied to some of the live action franchises. So we want to give them the opportunity to update their own lore, because they will have spent a lot more time in that space than any of our writers could possibly have done. And so them putting up, hey, we spent 10 years in this location, we have all these stories, and letting them put it up on community content and sell that is something that I think we'll probably focus on, at least for the immediate future. But there's a chance that maybe we'll look at things down the road and see how things go.
It's kind of ideal, right? Like that's a location thing is really ideal for community content. That's one of the best things that people could do, especially because of the unique structure of DR and then DRE.
Yep. What projects do you hope to have on Kickstarter this year?
Oh boy. Well, we've got Demigod, we've got Adventure, we have World of Darkness Ghost Hunters, we have possibly Dragon, possibly Mythos, maybe in some sort of dual Kickstarter. We keep kicking that idea around. Thought that might be cool. We have, I'm trying to think of the lines.
Exigence maybe for Exalted?
Exigence, definitely. If that's something we really want to put out this year as a Kickstarter. So Yeah, the thing with Kickstarters is Victorian Mage. Thank you, the Onyx Path.
Your company speaks.
Yes. Outside my control, certainly. And we're looking at all sorts of potential things to do there. Just like anything else that we do, Kickstarter is not necessarily the only way we could do crowdfunding as a thing. So it's a continuing process of seeing what works and what doesn't work and what things we could experiment, or like by having a virtual convention, things like that.
Right. The question is, Scion LARP, what's that all about? And I'll kind of go into this a little bit because I am the token LARPer in the inner circle, so I just help with these things. During the Scion Kickstarter, one of the stretch goals was, in fact, a live action version of Scion, and we worked with an outside team. They put together a really cool manuscript that had some great rules with it, and they delivered that to us earlier on in the year. It has been a bit getting things moving forward because they designed it in the way that they needed to design and done, but it wasn't in our templates and formats and structures that we used inside Onyx Path. So it took some time for me to go through and rewrite it, not because it was necessarily anything wrong with the material, but more just getting it to look closer to the Scion books we already have, because they're not in our heads. They don't know some of the nuances and details that we can smooth out. So I've had to go through and kind of rework that to get it closer to something that resembles what we actually present in the other Scion books. And that is actually now off in editing, so get that going on. But as we said before, there's lots of things happening, and also this kind of got transitioned over right when the pandemic hit. So is one of the things that has been taking a little longer than we would like.
Yeah. There's one here that says, can the Exalted Gods be made into a Scion Pantheon maybe as an April 1st release? No. Okay. It's a copyright issue. Right. So yeah. I don't really want to mix other people's copyrights into our games. And even though we do Exalted, even though we love Exalted, it's not something that we really want to mix around because it gets messy.
I will say that if you want to put something like that in one of your home games, it's easy enough to do. The stat block for God is quite small, and just sort of eyeballing the Exalted Gods, you could translate some of their qualities into Scion. But in terms of official stuff, no, I'm in full agreement with Rich because I kind of have to be. He is the boss.
Yeah, but you agree with me anyway on that one.
I do actually agree with you anyway. You shouldn't mix copyrights, and we don't want to mix game lines like that.
Yep.
For my own home games, though, I did include the Pillars of Eternity gods in my own home Scion game, but that's my own thing. I'd never put that out on the Nexus or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot you could do with Scion for that sort of thing, with your home games that we couldn't do. And again, it comes down to copyrights. There's plenty of pantheons out there or things that could be seen as sort of pantheons. I would always tease the original development team with the idea of the Transformers pantheon. And I know, Eddie, don't weep. But it's certainly something you could do if you wanted to, with Energon being your primary god Ichor or things like that. So or Motor Oil, whatever you want.
Oh, it's Energon. They convert Motor Oil to Energon.
So Unicron is a Titan, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely is. So is Primus, but that depends on which continuity you're talking about.
And this, they see this, he'll go off.
There's actually 13 primes, and they could all be there.
So technically, Prime is one of the good Titans.
Right.
Yes. For Chronicles of Darkness, are you still looking possibly adding a new core line, or do you think you've hit all the tropes? I don't think we've hit all the tropes per se. I think we've given an enormous toolbox. If you want to, I think Deviant in particular can hit a lot of those individual trope moments. We're not actively looking to, we're not spinning on something like that. We don't need to right now. There's certainly enough that we're working on and that's coming out for Chronicles still that we have to get our way through. But then, we'll see. If we get a really fantastic pitch from someone who has just hit on something that would be great for Chronicles as a new line, we will give it absolutely due consideration.
Would you like to see any of the Onyx Path systems put up for a Living World campaign in any way, shape, or form? I think the answer is yes, but that's not something we're going to be doing.
It's yeah. There's sometimes there's things that get a little bit outside of our bailiwick when, especially like I say, when we're definitely trying to make sure we're getting our things out as close to when we need them and want them out as possible.
Right, but I mean, if someone wanted to start working with us on, like, say, a Scarred Lands or Legendlore kind of Living World, I think that would be really fantastic, honestly.
Yep. Long-time viewer, first-time commenter. Will we see they came from Beyond the Grave on Kickstarter this year? Was that?
Now clarify. That's Dawkins. That was Matthew asking it. Yes.
Yeah. and that is another one that we expect to see on Kickstarter this year. We've got 6 months left for Kickstarter this year, so some things will probably fall into next year. And again, having to essentially having delayed the Legendlore Kickstarter from its original spot, there was a lot of catch up that we've had to do based on what we can do on Kickstarter.
Right. There's a question from Travis Leger. I don't know who that is, but will we see Dead Man's Rust on Kickstarter this year?
Definitely not. No.
I don't even know who that guy is.
Again, it's really what works best at the time. And we do a fair number of things we'd like to get up there.
Right. And we just skip on question is, are there any projects in process of being converted for a virtual tabletop?
Actually, that's a Travis Leggy question.
It is a question, but I think he's not able to
talk
right now.
How about I just say yes?
There are.
And Travis will reveal them as time goes by.
He's told me lots. The answer is lots. Do you plan to run multiple Kickstarters at the same time again?
Well, I mean, so we ourselves did not run multiple Kickstarters at the same time. Johnny Hodgson and his company ran the Creature Collection at the same time that we ran one. So we haven't really done that.
Right. A couple of questions came by. In April, so we see April 1st for the Scarlands Gods for Scion, and I think it's kind of I'll take a larger point is we haven't really done the gag products in a couple of years, and there's been a few reasons for that, and this year particularly was just because it wasn't the time, it wasn't funny, but even in past years it's just been it takes a lot of work to make those put together, and also they have to kind of be the right intersection of something interesting and funny, but also worth spending time to make. So, I mean, I'm saying these off the table. I'm not saying we'll never do those again, but also they are very time sensitive, and dropping everything to focus on a gag product means we're not spending that time working on other products. So I personally have been like, let's kind of shy away from those. Let's find different ways to celebrate that if we see fit.
But Eddie, you haven't heard my pitch for the April Fools next year.
That's true. I stand by everything I just said. In fact, now that you said that, I'm gonna double down on it.
so here it is.
Neall for Legendlore. That'll be our April Fools. It's just Neall as a Legendlore character.
It's true.
If Neall went through the portal, what would it be like?
Yeah.
It would be. We don't even have it yet. We will have to design completely new things for Neall.
Why am I a gnome bard? I don't like this.
I think you'd split off into like 8 different characters.
Question is, will we see a bird version akin to Monarchies? I'm not going to do any more full games. I did dogs and cats. I feel like it was important to do those 2 as full games. Everything else is going to be a supplement. But however, birds information is in Pirates of Pugmire. So if you want to play a bird, that's definitely the book you want to pick up. Steffi, how close were you able to work with the original creators of Legendlore?
So we did get from Caliber, we got a setting Bible with all sorts of information that wasn't in the comics and sometimes contradicted them, so that was interesting. But we didn't work with the original creators for several reasons, but we didn't. But I did. I spent 4 days reading all of the comics back to back, making a ton of notes. So we did stick very close to everything that's in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we had access to an enormous art library where we, at the very least, we could get a lot of inspiration for the art that Merciful Mike Cheney hired us from current freelance artists to illustrate. So
yeah,
it looks really great.
What I want to see in the art is that big 80s hair. I just fell in love with that one. That is amazing.
Yep,
that was so good. I think that's it then. We're out of time.
We're effectively out of time. Thanks everybody so much for some fantastic questions. We hope we've been able to inform and amuse you. We have a lot more going on today. Sunday is actually a very busy day. I have speaking of Mirthful Mike, his one appearance on a panel is going to be at 12 o'clock, talking about Onyx Path artwork, and we're going to have 3 illustrators on that. Priscilla Kim, Andrea Payne, and Amy Wilkins, all of whom are working for us currently and do some phenomenal work. And Mike and I are going to talk about art directors. They're going to talk about being artists, and I hope you all can join us for that. And I personally only know my own schedule at this point. Beyond the Grave playtest at 4, and then at I think it's 8:30, 7:30. 7:30. There is a.
Did you check your hands to see what you have it written on your hand? Okay. I thought you were just like, oh, it's
my blotter. I'm writing it on my blotter, son. 7:30. There's going to be a Remembering White Wolf panel with a bunch of the people that I used to work with at White Wolf, most of whom either have written for or developed Onyx Path projects as well, but there's going to be a few people on there that were actually more involved at the very, very, very beginning of Onyx Path. So there is a thematic connection, but mostly we're probably going to talk about the old days, like you do.
Indeed.
So, folks, this has been great. Do you have any last words you'd like to give, or a place that people can get to you on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can find me online at pugsteady.com. That's also my handle on Twitter. That's the best way to kind of get in touch with me if you want to talk about Pugmire stuff.
You can find me on Twitter as 100 Things I Love, and then all of my links are in a pinned post. And definitely go check out the Legendlore Kickstarter. And if you want the free preview manuscript, there's a link to that somewhere in the Kickstarter, so you can just get it and read it, and then back to the real thing.
Yep.
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at Burnt Neall, BURNTNEALL. I'm pretty active there. And just check out Scion 2nd edition on the Onyx Path homepage, and feel free to join in the discussion on the Onyx Path Discord about it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, folks. We will see you further on, and then someday we'll probably talk about all this experience and how it worked out for us. Check out the Monday meeting blog. We'll probably be a lot of that. Thank you.